Okay, so this is a session discussing why and how you might use two monitors in a classroom, or if you're running some type of Zoom meeting from home or from your office, etc. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is because the last 3 years I've had dual monitors in each of my classrooms, and at least one person who comes in immediately before me disables the monitors. In one case, they took the monitor and hid it somewhere else in the room because they were annoyed by having two monitors there. In the other cases, they were setting it up just to mirror the monitor. So you have two monitors next to each other in the typical classroom, one on top of the other, displaying exactly the same information, which pretty much defeats the purpose of having dual monitors. I started with two monitors back during the days of COVID because it was just so much easier to do so many things with two monitors than with one. And so let's talk a little bit about that, why you might want to do it, and so forth. And I'm going to open up a poll. We only have one person here, but so we don't have to do. I was just going to ask what might be some reasons for doing it, but well, I'll just show you how this could have been done. And one of the reasons why you might want to do it is because if you're using iClicker or polling software, it can be really helpful to be able to, oops, one more time. To do a poll. So this is an event thing. So if you wanted to join, you could do this. We're not going to do the poll. I was thinking of maybe a few more people here. And basically, it's really easy to set up events, by the way, in iClicker. If you have the app, you're an instructor and you're using it elsewhere, you just go in, choose event, and create it. You give it the name of the event, and then it's a one-time session, which only allows limited number of questions, but it's really good for short workshops or if you're doing a presentation. Rebecca and I gave a keynote at a group of community colleges a few weeks ago, and we use this. So it's a way of using this with people who may not be registered, who are not part of Oswego. So they wouldn't be eligible for the regular counts, but you can use it for workshops or presentations and other things. If you're going to a conference, you could use it right there to poll. So we don't have to use other software, which was the case up until about a year and a half or so ago, maybe 2 years, when iClicker introduced us. But I wanted to show how this could be used because what happens is if you're running a poll, one thing, well, let me get back to the regular presentation and I'll show how this might work in a second. Some of the reasons is that if you have a back channel discussion or if students want to chat with you, if you're in a big class or if you have some remote participants, you might get some messages from students during a presentation. And one time, the semester after when we came back from COVID, I had a student who posted something in chat when I was in a classroom that only had one monitor, and they were posting information to me about their health status. But I didn't see that because it just showed that there was a message there. And then I clicked on it, and it went right up on the screen for the whole class to see that a student was having some health issues, which is not something that they necessarily would have wanted to share. Now, I was recording that, so I had to go back in later and then edit that out before the recording was posted because, you know, students may be posting information to you that you don't want to share with a whole classroom, or either in person or virtually. So having that is a nice place to keep track of chat and other things that are not going to clutter up the screen, and also that may not be necessary or appropriate to share with everyone viewing it. So that can be really helpful. Another useful reason for having two monitors is if there's multiple things you want to share. You may have some presentations, you may have some software, you may have some readings or websites that you want to share. And if you have them all set up on one monitor, staged before your presentation or before the class begins, all you have to do is just drag them over from one screen to the other. And that can be really convenient. And it just makes it much more efficient than fumbling and having to do that in real time, wasting some time. You might have, if you're using slide notes, which is something many people do, having them on a second monitor makes it easy to see your notes and reminders of what you wanted to say. If you have a session that you are very precise about allocating certain amounts of time for activities, you could have a timer that shows you when you should be switching to the next stage of the presentation. And it's also helpful to make sure you stay on track. Um, Another thing, and this is where I use it, and I think it's kind of really essential, is that if you are using iClicker, for example, well, okay, well, actually, the basic principles is the shared monitor, the one that is being displayed to remote audiences or your in-person audience, should only contain the material you want to be displayed and not the stuff that's going on in the background. The other monitor that you only you can see, the one that's not being shared, might contain things like the chat and direct messages. It might include the things that you're going to be sharing later. So when I go into a classroom and set up, I'll open the Brightspace course shell. I might have some PDFs or some documents. I might have some QR codes for them to engage with some activity or go to some website or whatever. And also, if you're doing iClicker polls, for example, what you do is you have the main screen up here where you would be doing the polling. And I'm going to so it would typically look something like this. But one of the problems is that many people use a type of polling that was suggested by Eric Mazur. He was here a few years ago and demonstrated this, where you do a poll initially, you let people vote individually, but then based on how they voted, you ask them to discuss it with other people around them and then to revote later. Typically, you ask them to find someone who had a different answer to the poll question, and then you make your case, you listen to their case, and then you all vote again. And the problem is you don't know whether you should do that unless you can see the results. But if you put the results up, it would have a nice little bar chart showing where everything is. But the problem is you don't want to display that to the students in the room because they'll see where people were already voting. And also, if 95% of the class gets the question correct, you don't want to go through that whole process. Typically, you just go through it fairly quickly and maybe ask students for an explanation, or you'd give an explanation. Or if only 5% of the students got the correct answer, you may want to go back to some lower level of discussion to build up to that point. But what happens basically is if you click, and I just did that actually, that if you click on this, it makes a copy of the poll result screen. You bring this over to the other screen that you're working with, and you can then minimize it again, and then you can see the number of results coming in on the screen here, but on the screen that only you can see, you could watch the poll results come in. So you can see what students are saying, what they're doing, and so forth. And then you can go on to either a second poll after just having students discuss it with each other, or you could then just directly share the results by just grabbing the result screen back again or hitting the drop down. But by keeping it on the other screen, it just makes it a whole lot easier in order to keep track of things. Okay, now, there we go. And also, if you want to have breakout rooms, if you want to do other things, you either have that little Zoom annoying bar at the top or the bottom of the screen, which covers part of your screen, sometimes tabs of a browser you may want to get to. You can always get rid of it temporarily by doing Control Alt Shift H and then just pressing any key to get it back. Or you could take that screen and just drag it from the top of the screen, which would typically be up here or down at the bottom, and popping up often when you don't want it to. Or you could just move it to the other screen that's not being displayed, and so on. So it's a really nice way to keep track of all these things. Okay, now, um, and again, you record only the projected display because you don't want students to be sharing information from chat messages and other things that may not be needed, that you don't want to share in general with the whole class. So, and this again is something I did twice, which I normally don't do, but I didn't get much sleep the last week. Make sure you always share the right screen. I think we've all been in Zoom sessions where people shared the wrong screen that did not have the information they were trying to do. And again, twice I did that. It will tell you which is screen one and screen two. It'll put a number in the top left corner of both of those to make it really easy to make sure you share the right one. And you also see what's on it. But if you're used to sharing screen one and you want to share screen two, it's easy to make a mistake apparently, as I did twice last week. Okay. Um, Also, if you're in a classroom, don't be a jerk. Don't be that person who every damn class goes in and sets it to mirror the screen, because that's just going to be annoying for anyone who wants to use the tools that are there. Um, to each of the five people who've done that in the last 5 semesters, uh, who generally do not attend these sessions. But in any case, it's kind of annoying. One person each day kept moving, rotating the other monitor, putting it out of the way. Again, the same person who then hit it in the corner of the classroom on the side of the podium and unplugged it and actually damaged the plug, the cable, but doing that. But just don't do those things. It's having two monitors can be really helpful. And I have talked to some of the people. I don't know who was doing it last semester because potentially there were 4 or 5 people who could have done it. But it is annoying to the people who want to use the monitors that are there. If you're not sure which monitor is going to be projected in a room, just look at what's on the screen and what's on the projector. That's the one that's going to be projected. And you could ignore the other one if you'd like. You could even turn it off. But don't change your settings, because if someone's coming in and they have to log in and authenticate on iClicker, in Brightspace, on Google Drive, and other things, adding the extra 5 or 6 minutes, or well, the extra 2 or 3 minutes in between classes to go in and change the settings on the monitor back to the default of having both monitors be available just adds to the extra effort required by the next person to use it. And often that has been me, it seems. So venting a little frustration there. Okay, but that's kind of it. Any questions?
How do you do, like, if you're in a Zoom sharing like a Google Slides, if you want to put the presentation on one, the the notes, if you want your notes on one and the that are part of the screen, can you do
Yes. And
two
the way you do
slides?
that is if you're in Google Slides, you can go to this drop down and then you can choose presenter view. And that will provide the speaker notes in one version and it will put the other as the presentation. So what you would do then is this would go on the screen that you're not monitoring. And if you had speaker notes there, they'd all be appearing here. And you also could have the timer there and you could reset that and so forth, just so you don't have to look at the clock. Or if you're in one of those classrooms where there is no clock in the room, and apparently, someone posted on Facebook recently that a couple of buildings have no clocks in classrooms, which I thought we got past a few years ago. Um, but
Okay.
but yeah, it's really like that. And the same way with PowerPoint, that you have the option of going into presenter view, but always make sure that you're putting the display on the
Mm.
screen that's being shared. So, pay attention to that, because I've been in many presentations where people are sharing the screen with the slide notes and the actual display in a tiny little box. And then someone has to say they're sharing the wrong screen and they have to go back and move things back and forth. And moving things back and forth is really easy to do. You just literally drag them from one screen to another. And usually when these things are set up, it's set up so it's in a fairly intuitive way. If one screen is to the right, you just drag from the main screen to the right. If it's to the left, you drag it to the left. If they're stacked on top of each other, they're often set up so that one appears to be on top of the other, and you just drag it to whatever physical location the other screen is. And again, that's part of the settings, and usually they're configured automatically that way. And for those of us who've been using dual screens since 2020 or earlier, it's really hard to go back and work on only one screen. And
Yes.
the other thing is, you could go into, if you don't have a second screen, you could always get a second screen on Amazon for, I'm not sure what the current prices are. Let me just pop over for a second. This is on the screen that I'm not sharing, but I will in just a second. Um, if you go over to, say, Amazon and you do a search, yeah, you do a search. Oh, I'm not going to be logged in. Oh, I guess I am. Never mind. Okay. So I'm going to do a search for USB portable monitor. And what happens is you'll find a lot of them there. And this one is $109, for example. Here's one which is $66.49. It doesn't cost much to have a second screen. Now, you could always get a really nice one if you have space. But one of the things I have in my office, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but I have one of those cheap monitors. It was more expensive because it's 4 or 5 years old, and that costs like $150. But they come down in price fairly dramatically. In fact, I think this is the one that I have because I see KYY in the back. And again, it's high definition and it plugs into USB-C, comes with cables that'll connect to an HDMI port or a USB port or a standard USB and so forth. And you just literally plug it in and go with it. And it's just really convenient. So any other questions?
No, it's great. Thanks, John.
Okay, well, thank you.
I appreciate the one-on-one presentation.
Well, it's recorded and we get many, many more views on the recordings than actual attendance. And I have done this one a number of times, and I probably will keep doing it every time we do these
Biggest
until I
issue.
go into a classroom and not have a person before me change
The
it.
biggest issue I have with the second monitor is when I'm in Zoom and I go to share my screen, I lose all it moves all around for me and I have to like refind for some reason. Like it,
It'll be based on where they last were, how it last
okay.
used it, because it'll remember the preferences from it.
Okay, that makes
So
sense. Because of course my monitor at home is on one side and my monitor at work is on the other. So
And yeah, but if you set when you use it that way, it should but if you're switching, it will remember the other settings. So,
well,
okay,
I'll
well,
make this as
we're
your
in
next.
for the next session. So I'm going to head out from here. Emily, we're going to come right back, and Maddie, we're going to come right back. I'm going to stop the share and end the session so the video renders, and we'll be right back.